You can't predict what will be offensive in the future. You don't know who the dominant mob will be. You know, like, the worst thing you can say today, get you cancelled on Twitter, death threats, whatever, the worst thing you can say today is, women don't have penises, right?
Ricky Gervais challenges the idea that simply mentioning a topic in a joke makes it offensive. He argues that people often confuse the subject of a joke with its actual target, leading to unnecessary outrage. For him, comedy should have no boundaries, and offense is a personal reaction, not an objective rule.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about offence, isn't it? When people say they're offended, it's that just because you're offended, it doesn't mean you're right, you know? It's... offence is about feelings, and feelings are personal. Some people are offended by equality.
Ricky Gervais never shies away from pushing boundaries, especially when it comes to the so-called new rules of comedy. He believes that humor should challenge ideas, not conform to restrictions designed to avoid offending certain groups. For him, the moment comedy starts walking on eggshells, it stops being comedy at all. There's nothing you can't make a joke about. It depends what the joke is. Comedy comes from a good or a bad place. It's contextual. It's like this big debate about swearing. Is swearing okay on television? It depends. Many modern social activists argue that the subject and the target of a joke must always be the same thing. They claim that if a joke mentions a particular group, it's automatically an attack on that group. Ricky rejects this idea completely, explaining that comedy should be about the context, not the subject, and there's no topic that's off limits for a good joke. Everything was like me, agree with me. It falls into two tribes. Oh, I don't agree with them, so I block them, right? And now, in this post-truth era, people don't care about the argument. They don't look at the argument. They say, who's saying the argument? No, they're on our side, right? It's ludicrous, okay? The reaction to Ricky's jokes was predictable. Social media warriors instantly took to their keyboards, accusing him of everything under the sun. But Ricky didn't back down or apologize, instead calling out the absurdity of the outrage culture that has taken over the internet. He explains that the internet has turned arguments into popularity contests, where it's no longer about being right, but about getting the most attention. And the big controversy last time I did it was a Caitlyn Jenner joke, right? Oh, outrage on Twitter the next day. And by outrage, I mean a couple of people going, it was transphobic. It wasn't transphobic in the slightest. It was a joke about a trans person, but the joke had nothing to do with that aspect of her existence. Take, for example, his infamous Golden Globes joke about Caitlyn Jenner. The outrage that followed was almost immediate, with critics claiming the joke was transphobic, even though it was clearly about a celebrity's involvement in a car accident. Ricky continuously points out how the woke crowd fails to understand the difference between satire and slander, with many confusing the subject of a joke with its actual target. It was a Caitlyn Jenner joke, right? Oh, outrage on Twitter the next day. And by outrage, I mean a couple of people going, it was transphobic. It wasn't transphobic in the slightest. It was a joke about a trans person, but the joke had nothing to do with that aspect of her existence. The reaction to Ricky's joke about Caitlyn Jenner was completely overblown. While the Twitter mob was in an uproar, Caitlyn herself brushed it off and even cracked a joke about hosting the Golden Globes. Ricky loves exposing this hypocrisy, tearing apart Hollywood's self-righteousness with sharp humor, revealing its underlying corruption and double standards.
Now, I'd never dead name her now. No, I know it's right. I'd never dead name her now. But like years ago, when she was a man, that was years ago, I'm saying, right? And she went to the doctor, right? And
Ricky was accused of dead-naming Caitlyn Jenner, a term he had never even heard before, the Golden Globes. He points out how absurd it is to expect people to ignore someone's past, especially when that person, like Caitlyn, has openly shared it. Ricky's message remains clear. He won't apologize for acknowledging history, no matter how much the goalposts move.
That's the thing about offence, isn't it? When people say they're offended, it's that just because you're offended, it doesn't mean you're right, you know? It's... offence is about feelings, and feelings are personal. Some people are offended by equality. So what?
What sets Ricky apart from other comedians trying to stay relevant is his refusal to apologize or bend to the pressure of the woke mob. While many comedians apologize and backtrack, Ricky stands firm, daring them to cancel. Him, knowing his fan base doesn't care about the outrage, he doesn't need Hollywood's approval. He keeps doing what he does best, making people laugh, no matter how much the critics hate it.
it changed as well, because the first time I did it, like 10 years ago, the sort of press, particularly the industry press in America, was like, why is he saying these awful things to the most beautiful people? You know, and then by the 5th time, right, they were going, good, give it to him, we're sick of celebrities.
Ricky proves that when you refuse to apologize or conform to the woke mob, their power starts to fade. They thrive on fear, hoping to control you with labels like racist, sexist, or transphobic, but once you stop fearing those labels, you're free. Despite the outrage, Ricky continues to make people laugh, unapologetically pointing out the absurdity of pretending history never happened, and he just keeps winning. Ricky's Netflix special became a battleground where he shattered the sacred cows of the woke crowd, exposing their ridiculousness. When they scream, "You can't joke about that," his response is simple: "That's exactly why I will." Comedy at its core is about calling out hypocrisy, but today, too many self-righteous keyboard warriors think they get to decide what's funny.
So, where was I? Nervous? Don't be.
Ricky Gervais calls out the hypocrisy of Hollywood and corporate virtue signaling. He mocks companies that use Pride Month for profit while operating in countries where being gay is illegal. Gervais is one of the few comedians brave enough to expose this double standard.
Women. Not all women. I mean the old-fashioned ones. You know, the old-fashioned women. Oh, God. You know, the ones with wombs. Oh.
The punching down argument is nonsense. Comedy doesn't operate on a moral hierarchy. It's either funny or it isn't. And just because something offends you doesn't mean it shouldn't be said. Gervais thrives on the outrage, using it as material to expand his audience. He cleverly mocked the very concept of being canceled, pointing out that you need to subscribe to something before you can cancel it.
We still know so little about the brain, and 150 years ago, we knew nothing. It was all guesswork, right? And everything was just mental. If you weren't a white, sort of heterosexual, married Christian man, right? If you deviated too far from that, it was mental.
Ricky attacks the idea of punching down in comedy, pointing out how ridiculous it is to impose a moral hierarchy on humor. For him, comedy isn't about power dynamics, it's about what's funny. And just because something offends you doesn't mean it shouldn't be said.
I mean, I think a lot of offence comes from people mistaking the subject of a joke with the actual target, because, you can't legislate against stupidity.
Gervais tore apart social media activism. These people genuinely believe posting a black square on Instagram makes them the new Martin Luther King Jr. Real activism requires real effort, not just hashtags and empty gestures. But today, people think their online tantrums actually accomplish something when they don't.
Agnostics means no one knows whether there's a God. So everyone's technically agnostic. We don't know.
That's true.
So
that's true.
An agnostic atheist is someone who doesn't know there's a God or not, as no one does.
This whole being offended equals oppression idea, it's laughable. Being offended simply means you didn't like something, not that you're oppressed. Gervais emphasizes that being offended is a normal part of life and doesn't justify silencing others. Comedy should challenge us, yet the woke movement wants everything censored. Gervais refuses to conform, proving his relevance by showing how oversensitivity and moral outrage have gone too far.
And there's no sequel. So, yeah, remember that. But you all look lovely.
Ricky Gervais thrives on outrage, using attacks against him to amplify his message and grow his audience. As the Oscars approach, he called out self-important celebs on X. His advice? Just accept your trophy, thank your agent, and sit down.
He posted on X, "Good luck to all the Oscar nominees. And remember, if you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech. You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg."
Hollywood elites love to act as if they know how the rest of us should live, but most of them are completely out of touch with reality. They've got assistants to do their shopping and publicists to craft their opinions, never having to face the consequences of their own ideals. Gervais, in his 2020 Golden Globes roast, called them out for pretending to be woke revolutionaries and told them to just act, smile, and go home. But they refused to listen.
You could binge watch the entire first season of Afterlife instead of watching this show. That's a show about a man who wants to kill himself because his wife dies of cancer, and it's still more fun than this, okay?
Last year's pre-election hysteria saw celebrities, from washed-up sitcom stars to TikTok influencers, urging us to be scared and emotional about the country's future. Multi-millionaires crying from their mansions, telling us how oppressed they feel, isn't exactly what the public needs. It's the same tired script: play the victim, act like they're fighting the system, and guilt-trip everyone into following their lead.
Don't use it as a platform to make a political speech, right? You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So, if you win, right, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and fuck off.
Gervais wasn't having any of that nonsense and went full satire mode. He mocked self-righteous influencers with a skit where he played a wellness and beauty guru, claiming that not voting the right way was essentially a hate crime. Gervais understands something Hollywood never will. When you use fear and guilt to push politics, you've already lost the argument.
You still present, stand-up. It's a persona. I play a brasher, more arrogant, more confident version of myself.
Ricky Gervais has been labeled dangerous simply for making jokes, as today, telling the truth through humor is seen as radical. On The View, he explained the essence of comedy, breaking it down into simple terms. He pointed out that just because something offends you doesn't mean it's wrong. Feelings, he says, aren't facts, and being offended is a personal issue, not something society needs to fix. Is comedy the last stand for free speech, or just the next target? Drop a comment, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more takes.